Sarah Ripp, and I'm here sort of representing a couple different hats today. I'm with the Institute for Regional International Studies, as well as Latin American, Caribbean, and Iberian Studies. This series of events that Jacob's involved with this week are also being co-sponsored by the Language Institute, I know you're keeping count, and the International Division and the School of Journalism. So thank you to all of the co-sponsors for this five, that's right. So I will kind of just give you a quick little rundown on both of our speakers today. I'm always super excited to have Jacob Kushner come back to campus. He's one of my former advisees, one of my first ones when I started working for LASI, so it's always a pleasure when he emails me and says he'll be in town. And this time I got him like hooked up in a lot of ways. He's got a jam-packed schedule of classroom visits and career panels and all sorts of things. But Jacob has a degree here from Latin American Studies as well as the School of Journalism, and went on to get his master's degree in political journalism, from Columbia, New York City. He's international freelance journalist currently based in Kenya, and has been published by lots of well-known magazines, papers such as Newsweek and New York Times, Variety. No, not Variety.
Vice,
maybe that's what I'm thinking of. National Geographic, among others. And today he's going to talk about Haiti, the Promised Land. Now, we're also super lucky to have Mona Augustin here, all the way from Haiti, which is awesome. And Mona is a musician, he's an artist, he's featured in a documentary film about Haiti called Mosaic. And he's also an advocate for women and children, displaced people in Haiti, and just really pleased to have both of them here. So please join me in welcoming them.
Thanks, Sarah. Thanks so much. Like Sarah said, my entire Haiti experience, and I've talked about it a few times here, started specifically because of LASI's. I came back from studying abroad in the Dominican Republic, wasn't sure what to, looking for a second major, went and met Sarah and just said, why don't you consider Latin American Studies? I had another friend who had considered it, and long story short, I ended up majoring in Latin American Studies, taking a course by Alberto, actually as I graduated, a LASI's grant, which the department funds for students to go off and do internships or as they're leaving, is actually what funded me to allow me to come and start my career off in Haiti. And now I'm still 7 years later coming back to Haiti. I'm spending time there. So I really want to thank the LASI's department for funding those things for students. They're very important. I would never have gone to Haiti had it not been for that. So, and I want to just make sure it's clear how lucky we are to have Mona here today, because essentially Mona's story, which has been featured in a film and in other places, the story of him and his community in Haiti intersects exactly with kind of my most recent reporting project in Haiti, which I want to talk about. And also because I think Mona may have some different perspectives from the ones that I'm going to talk about, from the people that I met in this place I'll tell you about. You'll see why, but I wanted to start out with just showing just a brief trailer of Mosaic, a film made by a friend of ours, John Booger, who I first lived with in Haiti years ago as he was making this film. And so we'll start there just to give you a perspective of kind of the background in the city and where it came from. Let me see if I can pull that up. Let's see. Oh, is it already on Google?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, perfect. There it is? Perfect. Let me just play that. Thanks.
Oui, c'est dirigeant du camp de Cité Mosaïque. Je voudrais appeler pour savoir s'il n'y a pas quelque chose quand même qu'on puisse faire pour nous. Moi, c'est Augustin, mon âme, c'est coordonnateur quand ça, police, tout ça, avec pour mettre nous dehors. We wanted to land a signal for the new Haiti. Let's try to at least start the reconstruction. De nous pour un tout mois venir là et puis nous mettre toujours dans la condition ça. Il connaît que pas bon goût depuis il décide de mettre deux sur les retirer nous va nous côté pour nous aider. Sur les nous faire aussi ça nous tout.
Nous demandons de retirer le système patronaliste. Nous sommes capables de faire ça.
Puis nous côté pour nous c'est comme si c'est un paradis nous des
Merci beaucoup.
Bon qui là il te parle quasi par rapport avec c'est un des avant. Vraiment c'est arrivé que tout le monde capable de vivre plus ou moins. Nous pouvons les moyens mais nous l'esprit grâce à mosaïque.
So in a little bit, Mona's going to talk more about kind of the experience of his particular community and the one that's featured in this film, which we won't have time to watch all of. But
NASA launched the Biosatellite program, which attempted to study the
Vimeo is
effects
trying
of
to
radiation and
show us
microgravity.
something else. All right, Vimeo. Let's get back here. Great. Yeah, I'll go back to that in a minute. So, yeah. So where to start? A brief, history of Kanana. Again, Mona knows this better than anyone. He lived through it. But as you may remember, in 2010, a major earthquake struck Haiti. Around the Port-au-Prince area and nearby cities, 1.5 million people were initially displaced. This was some time ago. But I want to talk about not the destruction or the decimation, more or less, of several cities, but the creation of a new city that has kind of cropped up after the earthquake. This is a city where nobody lived beforehand. I met one family that lived there, but now there's hundreds of thousands of people. But it was essentially a vacant land, not far from Port-au-Prince, that turned into a city. I'm going to talk about how that came to be, what life is like there, and how a city comes to be when there is no government. How can you have a social contract between government, state, rights and responsibilities, taxes, if there is no government? What comes first? The government's responsibilities of roads and taxes and governing, or does electricity come first? Does water come first? Do the services come first? And so I'm going to talk about kind of the politics of how a new city with no government comes to be. So briefly, like I said, 1.5 million people displaced in a country of 10 million people. So you can imagine, we remember kind of the problems that occurred from the earthquake, and of course many deaths. But I want to focus a little bit on the land situation and what happened with all these people. Everyone was looking for places to live. Hundreds of thousands settled in displacement camps, not necessarily official camps, but parking lots or areas in the city, wherever they could find to squat. Because their houses were destroyed, where they'd been living, many left to the countryside to live with their family and that sort of thing. So you had this crisis with over 1 million people still, 3 months after the earthquake, still over 1 million people displaced. And the question is where to put them all. And so the president of Haiti at the time, René Préval, who just passed away a few weeks ago, the president decided to declare public this vast stretch of dry, desolate land that hadn't really been used for much of anything. There was not much agriculture there. He just tried to declare it public utility. What that means is he published in the national newspaper saying, this is government land. That was huge news to a country where 10% of the population had just been evicted and had nowhere to go. To them, when they saw in the news and the newspaper and through rumors that just an hour north of Port-au-Prince, here was all this free land for the taking, they went there en masse. Now, government land does not mean free land. It did not belong to these people, but perhaps President Préval meant it this way. We'll get into that a little bit, in the politics of land. But Haiti is a small country. There's, I'm not going to get too much into the, kind of colonial to present past of the land situation there, though we can in the discussion if we want. But long story short, he declares the land public just a few months after the earthquake, in order for a group of NGOs and the U.S. government and the United Nations to move a specific group of people from one tent camp. And that camp is a camp that was run by Sean Penn. So one of the camps where many people went to live after the earthquake was this golf course that people just kind of set up shop on. Sean Penn took it on himself and kind of created a foundation around helping these people. But time went on, the people were on the golf course, they needed the golf course back. So Sean Penn and the United Nations, UNDP I believe it was, US government, Central Command, Haiti's government, they all get together and they say, hey, there's this space not far from here. Why don't we resettle the people from the golf course to a more temporary or permanent, but certainly less temporary than a golf course, to this other place. And so they do. They build these temporary shelters. I don't know if I have pictures of them working with the US government. A place called Korai. They build these temporary shelters to house people. It's fairly organized, but what happens is as soon as those, few thousand families, I think, move to this organized, these organized temporary houses in Korai out in this land, what happens is that everyone else in Haiti, who hearing, again, this is free land, at least that's the way they think of it, starts flocking to Canaan, the area around where this organized settlement was. They start building their own temporary shelters. NGOs come a little bit and help build temporary shelters. Eventually they start thinking, maybe this is land we can settle on. So I want to talk about, this idea. So these are people who maybe for their entire lives thought they would be living in Port-au-Prince, indebted to landlords forever, paying more rent than they can come up with a year in a crowded, often, sometimes dangerous city, at least dangerous for their children, not a lot of opportunities. Certainly many people who only dreamed of being homeowners and owning land for the first time. You can imagine this idea of moving out to this place and suddenly, all that you can see is yours for the taking. Just find some land and it'll be your land, build your house. And it's on these kind of mountains that overlook the sea, and if you can see further this way, that it would overlook Port-au-Prince. And so you can kind of get a sense of, that people who never had this opportunity might be just so excited about the idea of land for themselves. So excited that they, well here, I'll read this first. I talked to one pastor who was one of the first people to move to a certain sector of Canaan. And this is what he said. He said, the promised land is the land of milk and honey. Canaan, this is our honey. I looked into how Canaan got its name, and it used to be that this land was only used for certain people would go and pray at the mountains that formed the backdrop of the land, which is kind of up here. And they would call it Canaan, the promised land, because it would be quiet. They could get out of Port-au-Prince, they could get out of Titanien, they could go over there and pray. And those are the only people who really used this land in any sense. So it got this biblical name, Canaan, which it still holds to this day. And some people, the question is this the biblical Canaan? Is this the promised land? Is this the land of milk and honey? And so I think that's a question we'll definitely ask Mona about, and we'll have to see. The way people stake a claim to just a vast land, I don't know exactly how it was done in the West in the United States or other places, but they identify a piece of land that's not being used, they ask around and they say, hey, is someone living here yet? Is someone planning this? And if not, once they find a piece of land that's not being used by any neighbors, they lay a foundation usually down. Just, some rebar, some concrete blocks, just enough to say, hey, this is ours now. Someone is using this. Because again, these people might be living in a tent camp. They might be trying to hustle out work in Port-au-Prince. They might be somewhere else. They don't have anything to live in here yet. So they build these foundations. So all over Canaan, you see these foundations of uncompleted houses where people someday hope to move into. And other people who have moved there, trees start growing in there, goats you can find just grazing inside what someday is going to be someone else's house. But this is kind of the first way of making some sort of physical claim to the land of Canaan, saying, this is my land by building this foundation. So lots of people come. I want to give you a sense of the sort of people who came to Canaan and what they're doing here. So I'm going to get out of this one more time and see if we can load. This is a forthcoming, let's see. So this is about to be published. A photographer named Allison Shelley and I have been going to Canaan to do a feature for the Virginia Quarterly Review about the politics of it and the entrepreneurs of it and the people who make it be. And this is going to be published soon, and anyone who wants can kind of zoom in and see actually all of the different streets and every single house or structure in Canaan has been mapped by OpenStreetMaps with the Red Cross doing some of the work. And you can read about that in the forthcoming article for VQR. But I wanted to show you guys this map because Allison, the photographer, who Mona knows as well and has photographed Mona over the years, did this great thing where she went and profiled different people living in Canaan. So I just want to give you a sense of you'll get to know Mona, so I'll actually skip that. But this will let you zoom in and kind of see the different people, where they live, where their businesses operate. She was just fascinated by how in just a few years all these entrepreneurs arrived, setting up their businesses. Let's see, let me see if I can remember this guy. It was not just a gift from the government, it was a gift from God. He's talking about the land there. So just to give you a perspective of people's views on this sort of place. I won't go through all of these. Maybe this we should come back to. Mona, that relates more to Mona's story, so we'll come back to that. A shoe seller, a guy who fixes shoes, a barber, set up his little shop here. I think that's the tailor. That's a tailor. Let's see. The nice thing about this map is, you can just get the sense for the enormity of the place. Let me zoom out for a sec. Maybe this will help give you guys a sense of this place. So I'll actually zoom all the way out and show you. This is Haiti. Okay, so Haiti, in the Caribbean, here you go. We zoom in on Port-au-Prince. And if you Port-au-Prince is a very large city, largest in Haiti, of course, somewhere around possibly as many as 3.5 million people in the surrounding area, in the Port-au-Prince area, and the cities that surround it. So all of this here, which I'll zoom in on in a sec, no one was living here in this whole area. This is Canaan. This is what was empty before the earthquake, and it's what was called public. And so if you zoom in and you just see the number of streets, the number of businesses, houses, it's kind of amazing to walk through here and see what's been created in such a short amount of time. And now what's been created is largely by people's own hands. So of course, after the earthquake, as you might know, $10 billion in aid, an unprecedented amount, was pledged to help rebuild Haiti. Almost none of it early on went to Canaan whatsoever. Actually, 3 years in, the people of Canaan, people of Haiti, who are often described as the poorest people in the Western Hemisphere, these people, in just 3 years, had invested $100 million of their own money, collectively, $100 million to build this place, to build their businesses, to build their homes, to build roads in some cases, electricity, bring themselves electricity in some cases. So just to show you the kind of ability of people to, the false stereotype of just because people are poor doesn't mean they can't save and invest in certain ways and find mechanisms, but also to say that, as poor and struggling as people were, just to point out what they were able to create in just a few years with their own money. So I don't know how much time we have to go through all of these. This is actually one couple who had been living here before the earthquake, which is kind of interesting, and they said that it was wonderful when people came in. It used to be a very insecure area. They were the only family around, and now they have neighbors, they have a community, they have people they can borrow sugar from, they have people they can sell their corn to. They were interesting because almost no one was here. Literally maybe a handful of families before the earthquake. To show you the sort of entrepreneurship, I wonder if I can zoom in on that. Maybe I have a picture of it later, but this is people constructing their own electricity poles. So there's no government there. The government hasn't brought electricity except to a couple small parts of Canaan. And so people are building their own, building poles, erecting them in teams like this, called a kombit, a group of people volunteering in the community. And then they hope to bring electrical wires and kind of illegally connect their electricity to the public grid, but then pay the person at the end of the public grid who's going to have a crazy bill, and so pay that person to siphon their electricity and whatnot. In some neighborhoods of Canaan, this has already happened, and so people have electricity at night a little bit because of this. This is actually one where, unfortunately, the project stalled. They ran out of funds, couldn't get the line to go all the way down to, so far anyways, haven't gotten it all the way down to the public grid. But just to give you a sense of how people are taking things into their own hands. Tons of schools in Canaan, tons of churches. You guys would be able to flip through this. I can send a link, or we can share a link. eventually. But let me get back into the PowerPoint here. So what happens though in a community where you have no government, no way to vote, no elections, is people kind of stand out as leaders. You know, a lot of people have different visions, and this is one guy I met in Onaville. His name is Salma Simius, and he became kind of a community leader in this entire neighborhood. He's the one I feature in the forthcoming article that should be out in the next couple of weeks in VQR. And you know, what happened as time went on is NGOs started to notice Canaan. Even though at first it was just people on their own, spending their own money, NGOs took notice, the Red Cross, many others. And so people who were kind of community leaders, these were the people that the NGOs would turn to make decisions about where a project should go, what kind of projects are needed, you know, who should benefit from the cell phone charging station that some woman is going to get to use and charge people to, you know, charge their cell phones, make some money off of that. So these people kind of become power brokers, sometimes more than they bargained for. And although most people I speak to in Canaan say we're glad that the NGOs are here and they're doing good stuff, it also puts some people like Salma in a difficult position. They're sort of having to compete for the resources of the Red Cross. So the Red Cross doesn't build their public plaza in some other neighborhood. They want the Red Cross to build it there. They want to have a community center in their neighborhood. So they have to kind of vie with the NGOs. And that, of course, you know, if the NGOs trust someone like Salma, then that means that the people of the neighborhood, you know, kind of go to him even more with their needs, with their desires. So people like Salma kind of get caught in the middle, and that's a little bit what the story is about that I'm have written. Let's see what else. And again, Salma's organized things like people, you know, they make street signs. And again, now you can zoom in on this wonderful map as soon as it's published and see it. But, you know, people create their own street signs. They try to beautify the place. They say, you know, what are the elements of a city? We need streets. We need street names. It needs to have a name. Every sector of Canaan has its own name. You know, people don't really say, I live in Canaan. They say, I live in Canaan 1. I say, I live in Onaville. They say, I live in Mosaic, Titaniet. Well, not Mosaic anymore as you're here. But, and the physical structure of a city, I mean, you just have all this land, right? Well, what happens if people build their houses anywhere? Someone like this guy, Evanson Louis, decides, wait a minute, like this guy was a truck driver back in Port-au-Prince before the earthquake. He would not a driver, but he would go along with the trucks of food. When it would arrive somewhere, he would help distribute it all. So he knows how a city works. He knows that the truck can't get down the crowded roads. So the crowded roads, there's no business. And so he moves to Canaan and he says, we need to create space for roads. People can't build their houses anywhere. He designates areas where the roads are supposed to go. He and a group of people, community leaders, do that. They decide where a hospital is going to go. They even set aside space for a police station. Now these are people who have many, many complaints about the government. Ask anyone in Canaan about the government, they'll say, we have no government. They do nothing for us. And yet, they set aside space for police station because they want to be governed. They want to be legitimized. They want to say, they want to be part of their nation again. They want to vote. They want to have police they can go to when something goes wrong. There's a whole aspect that I don't think I'll have time to get into of this park where they're sitting. This is a public park that these guys envisioned, and a foreigner, a diaspora, so like a Haitian guy who now lives in Miami, came back and wanted to turn this park into partly of a market, but also kind of his own home right next to it and kind of profit from it. And there was this big standoff between the members of the community and the park. I won't have time now to describe that. We saw this. But anyway, so here we have this place, no government. People are saving space for the government, but who to pay your taxes to, how to convince the government to give you electricity. That all comes down to this guy. This guy, Clement Belizer, is the man charged with figuring out how to bring government into a city of probably 300,000 people, although the last survey was 200, but that was a few years ago. So it all comes down to this guy. And I met him and I asked him, like, how do you bring government? And I say, the people say there is no government. And he says, well, they're not paying taxes. And I say, well, which comes first? And this is this great discussion I had with him. A very smart guy, grew up in Brooklyn, but of Haitian descent. And he doesn't see Rousseau's social contract as kind of a chicken or the egg thing, which comes first, taxes or services, Do people pay their taxes first and then they get services, or vice versa? He says taxes have to come first. He's a very firm believer in that. And I struggled a lot with writing this piece to understand, well, how do we reconcile that with this place? I mean, how do you start? I mean, people aren't going to start paying taxes to a government that hasn't given them anything, and a government's not going to start, especially like Haiti's with low on funds, isn't going to start just building things for people who have no mechanism to even pay or buy in for those things. And so it's kind of this interesting problem. And personally, I think I couldn't figure out how the social contract works in this instance, and I had studied someone named Charles Tilley. I don't know, some of you may be familiar with his contentious politics, his writing about how different community groups. Essentially, I was looking for a different lens to view how a government and people come into a contract. And Charles Tilley, this long-time Columbia professor who passed away several years ago, and wrote all these books about how his theory is people first create an identity. And they say, my identity is Onavel, which is different from Canaan, which is different. You're a group of people, and then that group kind of starts to advocate for its needs in different ways. Once you have an identity, you can advocate for yourself. And so what happens is in Canaan is that if you go there on a Sunday, or pretty much any day, but you go there on a Sunday, everywhere you go, there will be meetings of people. There's a women's groups, there's a youth groups, there's church groups of all sorts, ones that's working on housing, helping people build their own homes. There's just thousands and thousands of community groups that each kind of form together with their own idea. They want something. There's a group that's a women's group that's trying to get a cemetery built. Why? I mean, the women are responsible for taking care of the families, generally taking care of people from life and through death. And they say, this is a big city, people die here, we have nowhere to bury them. You put them on the mountains and the bodies could get washed away and whatnot. We need a cemetery. And so they get together and they try to find a way to convince the men that this land should be used for a cemetery, not for a school even, or whatever it is, People kind of form together to try to wield power in numbers, to try to advocate things. And they do that also then eventually in bigger groups to advocate to the state, to advocate to people like Clement Belizaire to bring in electricity, water, like the things that really a state ought to be providing. But I mean, Belizaire's in a difficult spot. Haiti's government's in a difficult spot. They're playing catch up in a city they didn't design, they didn't build, they're not there. There's two different municipalities fighting for control, who will get to tax Canaan. There's two different states, I guess, or cities, fighting for that. So, and part of the problem with getting too far away from, the problem with complaining too much that you don't have a government, which is everyone says, we have no state, pagantat. The problem is, if you claim that you are not a part of your country, that you're not a part of government, and it goes so far to claim that you're not really a part of your country, then you actually lose that ability to advocate, according to Tilley, right? Like if you're saying, you're so neglected that you don't have anything, which is what I hear all the time from people in Canaan, then you kind of lose that right. So it's a difficult balance, and I don't know if people do it consciously or not, but you see in Canaan, the same things you see all over Haiti are the rhythms and the traditions of nationalism, from singing the national anthem every day at school, to kids on Flag Day dressing up pristinely, and kids marching around, singing songs, their parents marching them around on Flag Day. And so you see these, no one would pretend that they're not a part of the nation, even though they say there's no government, they're not a part of the government. Yeah, I mean, don't know how to necessarily conclude this point, but other than to say that you see the motions of citizenship, of engagement in government everywhere, even though there really isn't a government yet. This quote is by Selma Simius, the leader I said. This is the motto on Haiti's flag, kind of a Haitian national motto. The load is heavy, and so many people call this the land of milk and honey, the promised land, but that doesn't mean that it's easy. People have plenty of complaints and plenty of hardships. This place is arguably on a flood zone, so during a hurricane, many people's houses could flood. Some people that we know even have claimed that it was a disaster to allow Canaan to take place here because born from a disaster, another disaster might destroy it. Hurricanes that come every year because it's a flood zone. There's tons of problems, lack of water, lack of sanitation. And building back is not building back better. Everyone still builds their houses in the same way that's unregulated and that caused so many buildings to collapse in the earthquake. So there's a lot of uncertainties. I won't have time to get into it, but one of the biggest uncertainties is the land isn't actually the government's to give, because the government never paid the guy who owned it, and now the guy who owned it is trying to sue to get it back. So Mona can tell us a little bit more about this in a second, but this entire city is, in theory at least, at risk of eviction by